Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we're going to talk about something that's interested me for many years, and of course many of our viewers, and that's secret societies. We're going to break down how secret societies affect us and who's really running the show as presidents and prime ministers are puppeted alongside the media, food industry, big pharma, militarism, and basically every other facet of society. We've seen over the last several years it become a lot more open to the public. People are starting to understand that it's not the presidents that are running the show. We've seen the CFR and Trilateral Commission behind basically every presidency for several years. We see an out-of-control global central banking system that has finally started to concern a lot more people than it used to. And for this, we're joined by Gary Arnold, a historical expert on secret societies. Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Arnold.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to be with you.
Now, can you tell our viewers a bit about your background and what influenced your interest in secret societies?
Well, I go back to the Goldwater days, and I remember when he surprised Rockefeller and the rest of them with the capture of California, and I was up there at the Cow Palace when he had won the nomination, and saw the machinations of Nelson Rockefeller, who was really looking to occupy that position. And Nelson Rockefeller is, of course, the whole Rockefeller family is key. Percy Rockefeller was a member of the secret society, Skull and Bones. But a friend of mine, or kind of a mentor, he was running for state assembly at that time in 1964. And I ran 2 years later at the age of 26 and won a contested primary at that time. And later on won a contested primary for state senate and also for Congress. And so I've been at these conventions and know what they're like. I was at the Ronald Reagan convention in Detroit in 1980. Ronald Reagan's background goes back to working with the government in the early 40s as a propagandist during World War II to keep us in there. And in 1947 or so, he had a handler called Cord Meyer. And I suggest people just Google it. They'll get actually enough information on Wikipedia on some of these guys. But Cord Meyer was part of one of the secret societies out of Yale. He was Reagan's handler, and he founded the United World Federalists. And the United World Federalists, Ronald Reagan was on their letterhead for 13 years. And also during 47 and 48 in that time, he was, according to the People's World, he was making films for the, I think it's LA Committee for Far Eastern Policy, something like that. It was advertised in the People's World, and he was doing videos promoting Mao in the 40s. And of course, when he became president in 1980, he was the first one by executive orders to move steel plants to communist China, and the country was still in pretty bad shape because 1980 the interest rates were almost 20%, and there was a lot of people out of work. But he began that. Richard Nixon had appointed George Herbert Walker Bush when Nixon was in, and he appointed him to be head of the United Nations and also ambassador to Communist China. And Bush's uncle was part of the U.S.-China Chamber of Commerce. And so the secret societies have been involved in, installing Mao and setting up the trade connections. And they had a presence there in the early 1900s. It's called the Yale and China, and it was something that Dr. Anthony Sutton from the Hoover Institute was going to do further research on. But I was lucky enough to be renting a cottage out to him in Santa Cruz in the early 1980s, and he received a stack of papers from a lady whose father and grandfather were members of Skull and Bones, and he wrote he wrote a book. It actually came out in four parts, and at the time it was combined into one. It was selling like $400 a piece worldwide to intelligence agencies just because of the closeness of those secret societies to the military. For instance, Henry Stimson, Secretary of Defense during World War I and II, Skull and Bones. William Howard Taft, of course, was Skull and Bones, and with the American-Spanish War, which was the false flag with the Maine in their harbor, not giving due notice to them, and then having the explosion, come from the inside rather than the outside in, was the excuse to expand the Imperial United States at that time. And William Howard Taft was, for a while, the governor of Cuba, and then later the Philippines. And then William Howard Taft became president, and then, of course, Chief Justice. So the Tafts have been very heavy involved in Skull and Bones. I think even the present day, the Bushes had William Howard Taft IV. I think he was involved with the Law of the Sea Treaty. But they're very close to the Central Intelligence Agencies, what's really nice right now, this book that used to sell for $400, if people just look up America's Secret Establishment and hit free download, they can get it. They can get that book for free or read it online. So they have the advantage of getting the basic structure, and it's broken into 4 parts, and it tells how they use both sides, the Hegelian, left against the right, and
always a problem reaction solution.
Exactly, and they control both sides, and I think a lot of people would be surprised that Ben Carson talks about his not having all these connections and stuff like all the other candidates are supposed to be dragging him down. But Ben Carson, one is on the Kellogg board of directors for their foundation. The Kellogg Foundation, if anybody can just go right to the Kellogg Foundation site, and they're bragging that they provide vaccines and fluoride for 350 million Central and South Americans. So they're involved in fact, they sponsored the first eugenics meeting in 1919. So, and there are Kellogg's in the Skull and Bones network. But Ben Carson, for 18 years, has been on that foundation. Yeah. And I know in our little community in Santa Cruz, there's a outfit called the Resource Center for Nonviolence, which is a Marxist outfit, and it prepares people for city council and other positions in government. Also, United Barrios, something like that. So they tend to exaggerate or spike up racism. And
it's hard to.
One article, I think, in the New American, back when they were having riots in Ferguson, Kellogg was part of the funding with Soros and some other people in order to gin up the racial tensions there. Yeah. But Ben Carson is also on the Yale board of directors, and people can go to the Yale board of directors and they can just go down the list, and they'll see a number of members from Skull and Bones, whether it's William McBundy, who gave money for altruistic defense and was part of the CIA, or if it's McGeorge Bundy, who ran the Ford Foundation and the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, which was set up there, and they put Mr. Hutchins in there. I can't think of his first name right now, but they came up with, they produced a number of United States constitutions, more along parliamentary lines, where it would totally distort the self-government.
Yeah. Now you have quite a history of having somewhat of an inside knowledge of what's going on. You ran for Congress. Can you tell our viewers a bit about your connection with Leon Panetta and your experience?
I came up to this area. I actually was managing the Wallace campaign for Northern California. What was interesting, 4 years before, in the Democratic Party, he had won 3 different primaries, which just had the whole establishment, going nuts, and because he was a states' writer. But he ended up getting shot point blank with, 5 shots to his belly, so he was in a wheelchair, and he was, unfortunately, he had pain until his death. So it not only crippled him, but it squelched him down. But that's when I was in Northern California. I found Santa Cruz and purchased a house up here. And I saw what happened when the left, I shouldn't say the left, because most of these people are financed, whether it's the left or the right. It's the right is usually, you find the Mellons and you find Rockefellers too. The networks work for the foundations on both sides. Like the Claire Booth Luce Foundation, you'll find people, a lot of women, Michelle Malkin, and a number of other women on the conservative side, and they'll never mention the CFR, Trilateral, Bilderberg Group. They're like Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin and all these other people that are just won't tell the truth. They leave all the pieces off the table and they propel the Hegelian merry-go-round, and that's a problem. But anyway, I saw the Marxist activity here, which was being funded by the New American Movement. Tom Hayden was exercising his power up here, funded by the Ford Foundation. They put out a thing called Economic Democracy, and one of the monies that went to the Study for the Center Democratic Institutions also funded a lot of college areas in the state to take over city councils and so forth. And they did it with the help, supposedly there's a little guy against the big establishment, but it was a big establishment that gave them all their funds to create these movements. And it's like going back to 1917 when the Red Cross mission went to the Soviet Union, and Raymond, I can't think of his last name. Anyway, he says, we're here to capture Russia for Wall Street. And people will find information on that from Dr. Sutton's book, which is really valuable. And the Skull and Bones has been known back in the late 1800s, as the Brotherhood of Death on the Yale campus. And there was a group that broke into their tomb or esophagus or whatever the building is there, and they called themselves the Claw and File, because they broke in and they report on some of the occult things that they found in there. But back to me and Panetta, I guess. Anyway, I won the primary against him, and had found that the following year they had a meeting at a local building in which they were honoring a community organizer. And it turns out the man's name is Hugh DeLacy, and people can look that up. In fact, if they punch around, they'll find a communist group in the state of Washington that admits, that he's a communist. But he was carrying around the petitions for to get signed for the county supervisors here in Santa Cruz. He was also honored in Santa Cruz by the Santa Cruz Community Foundation. And, these are people that are, realtors and people that should be defending private property and personal liberties, but they're doing the exact opposite. And they were doing it in tandem with the Trilats, the Packard Foundation. David Packard was one of the initial founders, along with Brzezinski and Rockefeller, of the Trilateral Commission. And today we have Obama with the most trilateral members in any administration.
Yeah, and I want to cut you off for one moment there. You mentioned Brzezinski, and I want to make my viewers quite clear that he was a man who handed over machine guns to Osama bin Laden when Osama bin Laden was working with the Mujahideen against the USSR as basically an FBI plant. I just wanted to put that out there to give some people some perspective on that.
Right, and the first people, you go back to Ronald Reagan again too. He was the one that was giving arms to Iran, the Iran-Contra deal with Ed Meese. And Ed Meese is always trouted out there with Michael Reagan for all these phony conservative groups that meet, and again, never mention Trilat, Bilderberg, or CFR. And of course, Meese is one of the ones that wrote in National Review. National Review was founded by William F. Buckley, member of Skull and Bones, and that's why he was the conservative most promoted on PBS to represent the conservative side. So they got their hooks across the political spectrum, and they encourage the constant food fight, so people don't know what's going on. His brother James Buckley, I guess, got in at the United States Senate in New York when there was a three-way race, and so he got a plurality. So he was a U.S. Senator for 6 years, and he went to a Bilderberg meeting, and I think the spotlight had kind of kept their eyes on the Bilderbergers, and they found a letter from one of the constituents that James Buckley says there is no such thing as a Bilderberger. So, I mean, he got the U.S. Senator, lying outright.
I've spoken with Bilderberg steering committee members, and I can assure everyone that the Bilderberg Group very much does exist. And it's odd, actually, too, that they used to admit or used to say that it didn't exist, and suddenly they couldn't cover it up anymore, and they don't think that we're going to see that as suspicious, that they said it didn't exist, and now they are forced to basically say it does. It's funny. It's an obvious example of what nefarious things might be going on in the Bilderberg Group when they are resorting to saying that it doesn't even exist.
Exactly. Well, the internet really has been great because nobody would believe it. I was meeting with a group, Ed Griffin's group, Freedom Force, and one of the people at my table, I was mentioning a few things about Ronald Reagan, about the transferring of steel plants to Red China, and he just didn't believe it. That can't be. But if anybody knew Reagan's whole career, and his handler, Cord Meyer, and the fact that I think Myron Fagan, who was stage, silent movie, and sound, and Anthony Hilder, I think they can find this on the internet and probably hear it. For a free download, Red Stars Over Hollywood, and Ronald Reagan is prominent in that, and that was way back when records were the long-playing records were these.
Anthony Hilder and G. Edward Griffin were really paved the way for a lot of what we see today. They were talking about these things long before the internet.
Oh, exactly. And in fact, Anthony was at my first campaign when I ran for state assembly in 1966. He showed up, and that's when we met. That particular campaign, we distributed, because there were so many books left over, like None Dare Call It Trees and The Choice Not to Echo, and a lot of different paperback books. And we distributed, we put a little folder in the back page that would fold out, and there'd be a little tab above the book. Most people won't throw away a book, but you could buy them, for 10 cents or whatever, but figure the inflation rate today to then. But we distributed 40,000 paperback books, and we printed up probably about 7,000 tabloids that went door to door. And they were so scared they sent people around to the churches from the National Council of Churches to attack me. The AFL-CIO set up 3 offices for an assembly district. Assembly district is like half a congressional district. And this is near the LA airport, the Westchester, Playa del Rey, Inglewood area. And they were buying radio time over XEMO all the way out of Mexico to attack one little assembly district way north of California. So the attacks were covering, a third of the state to come after me. And that was the time when they first started coming out with they had mailers that were designed for whatever race you were, if you were a laborer or professional or whatever. But they, the opposition had plenty of money to tell each particular interest group what they wanted to hear. But we came within 4 or 5 points of winning that election, and it was a 2-to-1 registration that was against us. But
well, that's impressive when you have something good to say. One thing I wanted to mention to the viewers is that a lot of people keep finding this so-called anti-establishmentarianist. And for example, there's Donald Trump, who, by the way, recently said that he has great respect for Richard Haass, head of the CFR. And we see all these false prophets coming up again and again and again. And I always try to tell people, if you see someone in the mainstream media and their face is out there, even if the message is hateful, they are probably a part of the inner workings of the military-industrial complex, the CFR Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, etc. There's usually a reason why they're in the media, because the media, they don't even have to rig elections anymore. They just tell you who to vote for. And when I see someone that was really pushed around by the media, I think of Ron Paul, who the media didn't even talk about when he was winning. However, people keep saying that the media is covering up Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is all we hear about when you turn on the TV these days. If the media didn't want people to vote for Donald Trump, they wouldn't put him 24/7 on television.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that. And of course, the fact that he mentioned Haas, which is not just CFR, he's the president of the CFR. That's the biggest warning sign. I do see the establishment, I guess, everything compartmentalized, so they certainly do have a heck of a lot of the establishment coming after him, and he is saying some things that I don't think they would like said. The 28 pages on 9/11, the vaccines, which is one of their major eugenic operations, and a number of other things, and just to be a reflection for nationalism is actually, I think, waking up a lot of people. So I think we should take advantage of it, but also run the caution exactly like you did with this Richard Haas.
Well, and I absolutely agree, Gary. I mean, it's hard to really say what to really think when it comes to Donald Trump, because he absolutely does say a lot of very anti-establishment things, but I also know that the establishment is a lot smarter than people give him credit for, and that they can, give these limited hangouts, as the CIA would call it, a limited hangout in order for the more anti-establishment people to vote for the person that they think is anti-establishment. It's the exact same example as, the X-Files talking about, FEMA camps and all these things. But it's also a Hollywood production, so you gotta wonder, there must be more to the story than what we are seeing. And Donald Trump definitely says some incredibly anti-establishment things, and it's very appreciated from the more anti-statist people out there. But I feel like the CIA and these secret societies are smarter than we give them credit for, and could be actually using that anti-establishmentarianism in order to get the people that have been fed up with government and are trying to leave it to the dust. What do you think about that?
You're exactly right. When I was working on the Wallace campaign, actually the person that was given charge of the state had double-crossed Wallace, and he was putting people in that if he won delegates in the state, they would have been in control of the establishment. In fact, the guys, I have no version of giving the guy's name because I worked for him. I was friends with him for a long time. He was with the American Independent Party, and his name was Roland Vincent, and he later worked for Arm & Hammer, and Arm & Hammer is the son of the founder of the American Communist Party. And since the Venona papers came out when the Soviet Union went down in '89, some people were able to get into the Soviet files, and he was, he was one of their guys. And he sponsored a $1,000 a plate dinner for Ronald Reagan in Century City that Anthony Hilder and I attended. In fact, we made a special tabloid for that specific event. We put a smiling face on the cover. It looked like it was pro-Reagan, but if you opened it up, you'd see, the expose and tongue-in-cheek. If people could figure it out, they'd know it. We did the same thing in Detroit. In fact, we hung a banner of the 666 with the forming into the Trilateral Commission. We already knew who his transition committee was, which William Casey, who was made CIA, and he was a partner with Arm & Hammer. And Arm & Hammer got special favors from Ronald Reagan. He got to drill in Libya when nobody else could, and I think China, when all the other, so Occidental Oil, which was a sponsor of Al Gore's father and Al Gore himself. I think Al Gore himself is on Occidental now. But again, it's communism is not the people. trying to overthrow the establishment. Communism is a tool of the banking establishment used to suppress the people.
Yeah, it's ultimate collectivism, where basically people who believe that they're anti-establishment and believe that they're going against the grain are helping the establishment control the populace and have complete collectivism. And I wanted to move into another topic here, Gary, where we're talking about a lot of these people that we see on TV that are puppets, but they come in the name of peace, the false prophets, so to say. And then there's those that we don't hear about at all, and that would be the Rothschild family. That's a family that's always piqued my interest, and I was wondering, can you go into the history of the Rothschild family and their influence from the shadows worldwide? Because I feel like there just isn't enough information about what could be the richest family and most powerful family on the planet.
Yeah, unfortunately, I probably should have put a few things on paper. I've seen their name come up more and more involved in operations. For instance, all the emphasis we put on the chemtrails and so forth can be taken right to an outfit called MITRE, M-I-T-R-E, and people can look that up and they'll see it's James Wolseley and other CIA people that are in charge of these operations, including the head of the largest aluminum company in the world. And of course, aluminum is one of the products that they they use to spray.
Yeah.
MITRE has a shadow or balance organization called the Balfour Foundation, I think, and Balfour has the same board of directors, and you'll find the same spooks in there from, I think most of the OSS guys are now dead, but CIA guys running from Republican to Democrat. But it was the outfit in Northern California, the guy that owns the Spruce Goose, that took over Air America and their big airfields and stuff like that in Arizona. And it's a continuation of that operation. Again, Anthony and I, we tried to get through the gates there. I'm sure there's a YouTube out there. They'll find us talking to some local people, and we took some pictures of the area. But the aerial pictures literally are the black helicopters and the big transport planes, etc. on there. So it's tangible. The other thing you mentioned, which I think is important, going back just a little bit, about how people surround somebody to either engage them or recorrect the course or direct a person that is not suspectful. But if anybody reads a book, it's called Stasi, and it's about the East German police. And I think this is by John O. Kohler. But he talks about they're using as many as 10 or 12 people to surround somebody. And they'd come in not only just as friends, but if they wanted to redirect somebody, one person would be kind of ugly and gruff, or not a very tasteful person, and that would be the person that would support them, but maybe break down later. And then the more attractive, intelligent-looking ones would be the ones pushing in the direction they want to push the guy. But they've had years of experience, and that's why George Bush brought over for Homeland Security the head of the KGB and the guy that was the head of Stasi to help build Homeland Security. In California, we have Janet Napolitano, now head of the university system here, appointed by Governor Brown, who is part of the network with Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda. And again, Tom Hayden traveled the world with Herbert Apteker, who was the theoretician of the Communist Party.
Sorry, all the names you just mentioned made me cringe. Go on.
And then, of course, Jones, who went to Guyana and killed all those people. There's pictures with Governor Brown and him shaking hands, and they used to bring his group in San Francisco or the legislature to push their legislation. So and of course he was a communist tool. But again, I don't think we have to worry about FEMA camps anymore, because when you look at Turner or Soros or Rockefeller or any of these, they're not going to put anybody in work camps anymore. They got enough workers. They're just going to dig a big pit and bulldoze us over. So I wouldn't worry about FEMA camps, because they're not going to bother with you, because the culling is going on right now, and it's done in a thousand minor manipulations, whether it's the GMOs or the fluoride or the chemtrails or the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So the war's already begun, and I think you don't have to worry about the.
Well, we've just seen.
You got to worry about staying alive on your feet, because if you're in a boxcar, you're going to be underground pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen with the Paris climate talk this last year, the re-signing of Agenda 21 as Agenda 2030. They are openly talking about depopulating us and just killing us off. And there's a reason why I mentioned the Rothschilds, and I'm leading into this next question here, which is who or what's behind the Federal Reserve and the global shadow central banking cartel? Because it seems today that there's a kind of a cross between people saying it's all secret societies that run the planet and then all central banks. And I think that the two are synonymous. So can you go into who is really behind this central banking cartel that's basically taken over every country in the world except for a few?
Well, Eustace Mullins and Ed Griffin did a terrific job with their books on the Federal Reserve, and I think the secret train and the phony identities to go there to create the Federal Reserve, and then to come out as if they were against it because they couldn't get the Rockefeller so-called plan through. And it's interesting and certainly not a mistake that the first New York chairman of the Federal Reserve was Pierre J., and Pierre J. was a member of Skull and Bones. And during the 1920s, there was Skull and Bones, the head of the Federal Reserve, during that time. But all those guys are part of the banks, and I believe Eustace Mullins put out in his book, he had a copy of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, and some of them were European and Rothschild, and I don't remember it, but we reprinted it in one of our newspapers. They might find it on my site. I've got two websites. One's called themuckraker.net, and they've got to put "the" in front of it, themuckraker.net. And the other one is newsexpose.org. And in that one, they'll get all our information on Ben Carson and an outfit called Next Door, which is parading as a neighborhood watch, but it's set up by Gray Line, which is full of CIA and FBI. And again, this is Wikipedia stuff. It's not it's not some crazy guy up in some cabin someplace making stuff up. It's the stuff that's already admitted and out there. So
well, and I mean, it's open knowledge these days. There's not much of an excuse to not know about what you're talking about, Gary, because maybe 20 years ago it was easy to call someone crazy, but these days it's all out in the open. And I wanted to ask, why is it that basically every president is related to each other, and with that to royalty?
Well, I haven't gotten into that. I've seen some charts and so forth. I don't know. It seems kind of, really bizarre, but I guess we're all related back to Adam and Eve when you get down to it. So I'm not sure how close those are. I haven't studied it. I mostly look at the action elements that are out there and take them to their source or their funding. So
well, the reason I ask that is because a lot of people will say, and I can't really debate them because I don't know myself, but that Skull and Bones is behind basically everything, but something has to be behind Skull and Bones, and with that's why I ask. There must be some kind of reason why all these people are related. Is there more to it than Skull and Bones? Who controls the Skull and Bones?
Yeah, Initially it was founded by Alfonso Taft and let's see, who's the other guy? William Russell. Alfonso Taft ended up, I think, Secretary of Defense during or after the Civil War. He was also an ambassador, ended up as an ambassador to Russia, so that might have been where they started their designs, on Russia, years before. The person that incorporated Skull and Bones, Daniel Coit Gilman, was one of the most powerful Skull and Bones persons at the end of this last century. He's one that incorporated Skull and Bones into the Russell Trust. And if you see, what was that movie with De Niro and so forth, The Good Shepherd, was a movie put out to mislead people about Skull and Bones, but I think it serves a purpose. It's a good movie as a standalone, but it does show some of their rituals and some of their power with the intelligence services. So it does put some meat on the bone, so to speak, for people to get a feeling of it.
Like a limited hangout, like I mentioned before, to give us some of the story, but not the whole story.
Yeah, they're making it look like it's a good shepherd. He's looking out for us sheep against the bad communists. So, and of course, they're the ones that funded and kept communism going. The reason the lady sent the secret papers of her father and grandfather of Skull and Bones to Dr. Sutton is he wrote a book called National Suicide, and in that he showed that 80% of the ships of the Soviet Union were built in the West. And then he goes on to the Ford Motor company built plants in the Soviet Union and all their stuff right through the Vietnam War. We were supplying them with everything that they needed to win. And Vietnam is just it's like Cuba. I mean, it's just, there's just no match if you wanted to knock it out. And if people want to get into the Cuba thing, Gonzalez, I can't think of his first name. He writes about Castro being a CIA agent, and it's a terrific book. I didn't know Castro worked in Hollywood. I didn't know he honeymooned in the United States. I didn't know that the Rockefellers, travel and vacation in Cuba for decades. Anyway, Castro was in Bogota, Colombia, way back when George Marshall was active. He created the Marshall Plan in Europe, which was the foundation of the European Union. And they were trying to do the same thing with the Organization of American States. And they needed a reason to scare people into, turning over some of their sovereignty to a UN or something. And Castro was down there in Colombia at that time in order to assist George Marshall in creating an environment where people would, join with his group to regionalize that section of the world for the ultimate world government. Some of the earliest blueprints were done by Colonel House, who was the assistant to Woodrow Wilson, and he wrote a book called Philip Drew Administrator, in which he talks about regionalization, he talks about a North American Union, he talks about a kindly American dictator, and the regionalization. The second book that really pushed the regionalization, which is Agenda 21, is Nelson Rockefeller's The New Federalism. And that's where Leon Panetta up here was campaigning for Rockefeller in the early 80s. There's I saw a Rockefeller-Reagan political button from years before. I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit. I want to hit Reagan because most people, he gives you chills with his free enterprise speeches and so forth. But he was totally captured. They did a real estate deal kind of like Obama had, with the crime family, so Obama would have a bunch of money in the deal. I think somebody said that happened to Rubio, but it also happened with Reagan. He had a couple of acres up in the hills up there, and somebody paid 4 or 5 times the price price of it. And then he went around the United States on speaking tours for General Electric, and that was, preparing him to perfect him for their own use.
Well, I've seen the photos of Ronald Reagan at Bohemian Grove back in the early '80s, actually sitting next to Richard Nixon, and I mean that speaks pretty loudly right there alone. It is interesting that he did talk a lot about free enterprise, and for those that haven't looked deeply into his background and who he worked with over time, it does seem like he actually did stand for free enterprise until you look at his record and you see that he was actually one of the most liberal at that point so far, so-called conservatives that the American people had seen. But I have a theory, Gary, and I wanted to know what you think about this. Of course, with the House on Un-American Activities Committee back in the 1950s, I felt like that led the way for communists to believe that the establishment was against them, and actually helped provide some ground for them to trek on in order to become more popular, as we saw with the 1960s. I also see a lot of people walking around with their Che Guevara shirts on, despite the fact that he was a child-murdering racist who promoted Mao Zedong and Stalinist Russia and Adolf Hitler. Che Guevara was not a good man. And of course, because he was killed by the American government, a lot of people believe that, that proves that the American government is against communism. But how much of this is just a script that was created by the United States, larger shadow entities within the United States government, in order to kind of perpetuate this idea that communism was a right way, the true anti-establishment way, and conservatism or freedom and liberty were the crazy right-wingers who want to ban black people from restaurants and that hate the poor. Because I feel like a paradigm was created using the House on American Activities in the 1950s, as well as the fight against Cuba. It just seems like a giant script.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with Joseph McCarthy. He could see clearly, that we were funding the other side, and rather than just keeping his eyes on the people in the streets, he started following the money and the power. When you've got the Bundy brothers, funding Alger Hiss's defense, I mean that should be something. In fact, I think he wrote a book called America's Retreat from Victory, and it's all about George Marshall. And I believe that's a free download, but you read that, and it'll knock your socks off. He was getting pretty close to the top, at the apex, where the deals are cut in order to create this food fight, this deadly war. And it is perpetual war, for so-called perpetual peace is what they call it. They want to keep people under control with an outside threat, and that's your report from Iron Mountain and countless other things. I've got a document that's just probably 120 pages that was written right before 9/11 from NASA, and they're talking about chemtrails and having American martyrs seen on TV. But all the stuff that was written down before it happened, and it's there's so much documentation that it's kind of hard to ignore unless you're watching TV. We only have a couple of 3 networks and 2 wire services, and everything is controlled around here. We've got the Monterey Herald, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, and the San Jose Mercury. They were all bought by Bill Gates, who's a Bilderberger, and so you get nothing that isn't already distilled, and none of this stuff is being talked about. The movement, I think, what is critical now is we're getting ready for another 9/11, and I know that all the regional agencies, here it's called the Monterey Bay Area Association of Governments, AMBAG, but you'll find these councils of government webbed all across the United States, and what they're doing is, at least locally here, they're bringing in so-called stakeholders, wealthy people that go in and sit sit there. The newspaper never reports on them. So the wealthy people, or the agents of the Packards and Panettas and so forth, are in there creating the policy, and all the policy is designed to move authority so it can be, converted to a North American Union come the virus or the rogue atomic bomb or whatever the crisis they're going to have. But it's so clear and so evident. We've got ICLEI people, which is Agenda 21 outfit that's funded by the United Nations and the World Bank, all over the place. They got their superintendent of schools in the county. You can look up American ICLEI, and he's on the board or one of the committees there. The planning department brought up 60 pages of stuff that allowed them to legislate themselves, create their own fines and create their own laws, totally bypassing the supervisors and stuff, and the supervisors just rubber stamp it. Yeah. There was a little newspaper here that pursued it and found the person that wrote it, and he was from the ICLEI office up in the Bay Area. And but none of the newspapers, realtors that should be smart, don't stand for private property anymore. They're discussing it. I was a broker for many years in Southern California, and I worked with Howard Jarvis, and I'd take some of the speeches where, there were death threats and, to speak before unions and things like that. So I took some of those and flew around the state, and the way we won was to be, not gentle or nice, but to be outspoken, and that's how Trump and Anthony Hilder and I have run, some of the campaigns where we at least, take the primary, and then when you take the primary, if that's all you get, you also become a delegate to the state convention, and you also get 3 appointments by winning a primary. And so once you're there, you can issue resolutions, against the CFR and all kinds of other stuff. There's a lot of stuff people can do that they just don't.
Yeah, well, it's quite incredible how society seems to mimic the Communist Manifesto these days in many ways. And of course, they play the victim card a lot of the time on the left. Of course, as you mentioned, it is a left-right paradigm, but it seems like, as you mentioned, the Hegelian dialectic as well, of this kind of problem, reaction, solution. They keep putting out this message of remedy for problems that actually just create the problems in the first place. For example, the fact that there's basically no true capitalism left in society, but they get people standing up speaking out against capitalism when it's actually corporatism, corporate fascism that we see. And it just seems like it's hitting us from every area in life, from food to water to infrastructure to money to militarism. It's just gotten totally insane. And I wanted to ask you, Gary, from the Bohemian Grove to Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission to the CFR, how do we, the people, undermine the nefarious efforts of secret societies globally? Is there a solution?
Well, what we use in our tabloids, and if people go to those websites, they can certainly find one. There was do you recall a chart that was laid out that showed the president, his cabinet, and the media and the military and a lot of that, and it gave the names and it put CFR or T behind their name or a B for Bilderberger. Yes. And that's a single page. It really shows the power. One single page, it really gets a message across. And we put it in the local weekly newspaper. About a full page, because a weekly newspaper sits around for a whole week rather than just one day, and people in restaurants and casual places where people are waiting for a haircut or whatever, you get to look at it. So and of course the internet is out there with your Facebook, etc. So that that can be used. One of the books, actually, it's on Ed Griffin's website of Freedom Force. One of the best books he has there is called Who's Who of the Elite. Mm-hmm. And it's a requirement for any researcher, by Galen Ross. It's kind of expensive, I think. It's probably $28, $30, something like that. But it's an incredible tool. It names people that are in these various groups, Trilat, CFR, and Bilderberg, and it'll show the corporations, etc., that they're attached to. And it turns out, for instance, the newspaper that was on here for a while by Wall Street was by Peter Kahn and Karen House. Karen House is related to Colonel House. Colonel House has thick associations with Skull and Bones. Daniel Coy Gilman, who incorporated Skull and Bones, was the head of the California University, and actually it was a socialist newspaper in the Grange that came out after him because they were picking up sticks, doing some of their stealing, and he wrote to his sister saying he got out of California kind of just in time. But Daniel Coy Gilman invited the Sidney and Patrice Webb to the United States, and they are the ones that founded the London School of Economics. They are the ones that founded the Fabian Society, and that came from money from Cecil Rhodes and probably Rothschild, but Cecil Rhodes for sure. Well, and of course they have a stained glass window. Look up Fabian Society and stained glass window, and on their stained glass window they got a wolf in sheep's clothing. They really don't even care.
Well, and you mentioned the London School of Economics, and actually I wanted to make one mention here that I've debated economics with several people who've gone to the London School of Economics, and it's as if they never learned anything on the subject of finance. It's quite unbelievable. The Premier of Manitoba up here in Canada, he went to the London School of Economics, and he basically gave in to my argument within a few seconds because he's a socialist, he's a known socialist, and I asked him some pretty simple questions about Keynesian economics and how it's only supposed to be a temporary solution to a wartime issue, and that it's not supposed to carry on for a long period of time. And he's like, oh, you're probably right. And I'm thinking, this guy spent a lot of money going to the London School of Economics. Did he actually learn anything there, or was he just indoctrinated into some kind of secret society? Because of course we here in Manitoba, Canada have a legislative building that was built by a known Freemason that has symbolism all over it. It's got Hermes, or the Hermetic god, on the roof of it. It's got the Star of David in the center of the building. It's got I could go on and on for a long period of time. There seems to always be someone from the London School of Economics taking charge in this building, and I've seen this in other provinces in Canada as well as several states in the United States. It seems to be there must be some huge connection with the London School of Economics.
Yeah, well, they've got the, Churchill I saw a picture of Hubert Humphrey. Mm-hmm. Hubert Humphrey speaking at a Fabian Society in England, and they had the Hellfire Club, something like that up there. Up here in Northern California, we got the Bohemian Grove, and their big emblem is weaving spiders come not here. Yeah. And it's like an oracle.
And then they dance around Moloch.
Just take it the other way. We're weaving spiders. You don't come here, right?
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood got invited there, and he's also part of the Leon Panetta Foundation here, and that's total world government stuff. So he's not a nationalist by any means. So
basically, a whole bunch of so-called conservatives, communists in conservative clothing, pretending to be, something that they're not, to infiltrate that side of the argument.
Yeah, well, the Trotskyites moved, right, they are the neocons. That's Irving Kristol. Irving Kristol is the father of Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol runs the Weekly Standard. He's a Bilderberger. His father ran a magazine in England called Encounter, and it was CIA financed, and it supported the socialist labor government. And so all these neocons, it's pathetic. The counterfeit conservatives are as bad as the counterfeit, and there's counterfeit on the left too. Oh, yeah. The people that are looking for social reform or social action or whatever, and we do have a lot in common with many of their issues, but they're always pointed to the wrong direction. Just as the groups here, I think Hillsdale College sends out a newsletter. It's free. It goes for like 750,000 people, and Hillsdale College was taken over by William Buckley. So, most of these families, they want a private college, and they want a conservative college, so they send them there. But again, all the pieces are off the table. No CFR, no Trilateral Commission, no Bilderberger, and then they're sent to the Rick Warren churches. And Rick Warren was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah.
There's just so many counterfeit organizations out there. We attended an Accuracy in Media event, Anthony and I, in Long Beach on the Queen Mary, and it was Kissinger and Associates had one or two people there. One man offered Anthony to come back there. He says, "Why are you doing what you're doing? You'd have more fun with us." So they knew his talent for. He's a great writer and really captures attention. But I saw him, propose. I saw the proposal right before me, and they do that. And again, with my politics, there's pictures with me with everybody from the Senate Foreign Relations head, which was Chuck Percy, to Harold Stassen, who was the founder of the CFR and ran for president more than any other person in the world. There with Norman Cousins, who is also president of the United World Federalists. You get close to these people, and that personally they're fine. You wouldn't know that they were planning your demise or your control.
Yeah.
And some of them are compartmentalized. They're sold on world government or whatever older dash is out there.
Yeah.
And
it most certainly comes from all sides of the argument, and I urge the viewer to realize that freedom and saving doesn't come from the government. It comes from you yourself. You as an individual are your own savior. We the people, we exert freedom. The government doesn't give us freedom. They can try and take it away, but they can't give it to us. We have it intrinsically from the moment that we are born, and that's so important to know. You provided some interesting solutions. The idea that we should really, as media, be getting out there more and talking about the CFR and Trilateral Commission and root them out so people realize more often that they are behind so many things that we see in society. They are basically wolves in sheep's clothing very often. It was nice to see Dr. Ron Paul actually bring up the CFR and Trilateral Commission several years ago at a debate, but that was almost 8 years ago now. So we are in need of people who are willing to go out there and say what's going on, expose the CFR, expose the Bilderberg Group, Bohemian Grove, Trilateral Commission, Skull and Bones. We need to talk about these things because these issues affect every last one of us personally with everything that we see in society today. So Gary, I thank you so much for talking with us. It was an honor talking with you. Can you tell our viewers how people can find more of your work and support the work you do?
Yeah, let me give the websites again. One is themuckraker.net. You got to put the in front of muckraker.net. Mm-hmm. And the other one is newsexpose.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Gary. It was an honor speaking with you. I'd love to speak with you again. There's always so much to talk about, and it's something that's very polarizing when people realize that everything they've been told is a lie, and we all have that moment in our lifetime when we figure it out for ourselves and say, wow, everything I thought has been false. I've been used as a pawn in the cog of a system that is basically trying to bring on complete collectivism over the individual and control us all under the guise of peace and love and understanding. And it's a scary thing for us to come to the understanding of, but it's something that we need to understand if we ever want to defeat this monster that's basically taken over society. It's up to us. So thank you so much, Gary. It was a pleasure talking with you. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.